Welcome to a special episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee, out of breath because I've been trying to do push-ups to stay warm over here. We have Hannah Otto with us. Hannah, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, stoked. We have our CEO Nate Pearson with us too, and we're going to talk all about
how you can go like 8 hours on the bike, but like 8 push-ups and you're gassed.
It's like, are you implying my lack of upper body strength is present?
No, it's kind of like when cyclists walk upstairs, fast.
Yes,
like my legs hurt. And like, how does that happen?
It's so true. Isn't that funny? How you go upstairs and you're out of breath, but then you can do so much more. Yeah, that's how it goes. Hannah, you've been sick lately. I think I saw that correctly from Instagram.
Yeah.
Yet you still, your job, you still got to do your job. So you've been racing through the whole thing. I want to talk about Leadville, SBT. I also want to talk about how you've managed illness with all this. We're also going to get into an interesting question on sunscreen. We're going to talk about another question that somebody submitted that goes into how to raise your threshold. Like if you're the sort of athlete that has a really good power to weight ratio, but you're just getting dropped by people, and what you need to do. That's going to be a great one too. Some great questions. We're going to get to all of them. But first, Hannah, where do you want to start? With the races, or do you want to start with the managing the illness stuff? Because it's kind of an overtone for everything that you've been dealing with recently. I'll let you decide where to start.
I don't even know where to start. It's kind of a tough topic, right? Because I think that when people claim illness at a race, it comes across as an excuse. And that's the last thing that I want it to be. I more want it to just be informative in the fact that this is something as human beings that we all deal with. And there are better ways to handle it than others. But no matter what, it is frustrating. And nobody is immune. Sooner or later, you will likely come across these questions and the need to make decisions around it. And so hopefully, that's the whole point in this podcast, me being on this podcast, is sharing experiences that hopefully other people can benefit from. So that's really my goal from talking about this. Yeah.
So can we get into like what and if you don't have to share specifics or anything else, but what were you sick with and how did you adjust your training? And then we can talk about how you approach the racing too later on. But.
Yeah. So, coming into Leadville, I had an awesome training block. I was setting a lot of PRs. I feel like I was at the best I've ever been. And a couple days before the race, I kind of started feeling just like, am I coming down with something? I don't really know. And you're in denial and you're like, no, I'm fine, right? And so when I lined up on the start line at Leadville, I didn't feel sick. But I think as an athlete, as a professional athlete even, you're very in tune with your body. And very quickly in the race, I became aware that something was off. And again, I think that it's important in the race situation to not analyze it. I see this happen a lot with athletes is the race is not the time to analyze what is happening. That's an after the race situation. You're dealing with your circumstances during the race. You're analyzing them after. And so for me, that was really my goal and my mindset for most of the day is pushing the why of why is this happening? Why do I feel this way aside? And just focusing on what I can do in the moment to overcome it. And, I think, again, it's funny because I crossed the finish line and I was disappointed in my result because I had very high expectations for myself. But again, when people ask me, when my competitors ask me oh, how'd the day go? It's like, I was 8th. I don't want to diminish anybody else by saying that that's a bad day or a terrible day, right? It's I still went sub 7:30 at Leadville, fine, but it was a tough day. And I think for me, that is the story that I want to really emphasize with Leadville is it's okay to have tough days. We all have tough days. And I think as a professional athlete, part of our job is anyone can perform on the great day. When you push off the line, you're like, oh man, I have the legs. Those are the days everyone can do. It's part of being a professional is when you do push off the line and go, I feel like dog do. Like that's the day you have to do your job beyond, it is work. It's a job. It's figuring out how to execute no matter what.
Yeah. Nate, can we give Hannah the safe space that none of us is going to consider this like an excuse? Because I think that's important too, right?
It's just learnings for everybody else.
Yeah, and I think that you can't have a conversation with this if Hannah, if you have like all of our listeners here, they'll agree that it's a safe space to be able to not be like, oh, well, the reason that I did sub 730 instead of whatever my goal was, or the reason that I got 8th, whatever, instead of whatever the goal was, we all know that you were actually sick. So we know that it's not like an excuse, and we know that that's how it goes. Because what I'm getting at here is there's an athlete listening to this is trying to understand, when do I pull the plug? Like, when do I skip out? When do I skip that race instead of doing it? And I know it's really different for you because it's your job, like you said, and you need to be out there doing those sort of things. So were you sick to the point where, like, if it wasn't your job, would you have skipped the race? And is there anything that you would, like, any suggestions that you would give somebody on how to assess that situation?
Yeah, I don't think I was so sick going into it that I would have skipped the race, but I think it became pretty obvious early on, like, when your body, like when you're sick and you just have like kind of those muscle aches and that like overall fatigue and achiness, like that was kind of what was starting pretty early on for me. And I think that there's really two things. Well, I'm saying two things, but maybe I'll come up with more as I talk. But for me, I think it's how big of a goal is this, right? Like, I think if you're an amateur athlete and you've been training all year for this race and you have a cold, I mean, what are you saving it for? It's okay, I think, to push through a cold, which then leads to the second question is, are you going to cause more damage? Which if it's, beyond a cold, if you're thinking like, oh, like bronchitis or pneumonia, like, are you at risk for developing those things? Are you pushing beyond those things? Like, I never want to encourage someone to hurt themselves, but I think that it is okay to push your body a little bit when it's your number one goal. A lot of people do train all year for one race and no one is immune. It can happen. And so I think it's okay. For me, Leadville was an A event for the year. And so I think that's another reason, like, I quote unquote wanted it enough to push through all of these things to get it done no matter what. And I think that leads well into Steamboat, because I woke up the next day after Leadville feeling quite ill, probably because I did push myself beyond what I should have. And I was dealing with illness. And that's when it's like, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, before Steamboat, I'm like, oh, wow, I am really sick. I feel really bad. I don't know if I'm gonna do this. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I start feeling better. And that's one that I think if it wasn't my job, I would have been like, I've been sick all week. I'm going to call this thing. But since I was on the trajectory upward, I decided might as well try. Because Steamboat was not my A event, I gave myself the grace in that one when it became obvious that I still was not better to say, okay, this is not my A event. This is not my focus. I'm going to pull out because I still do have another A event this year. And I'm going to make sure that I'm well for that one.
Yeah. That's Nate, after you did Leadville, would it be fair to say that you felt great the next morning or no?
No, I did not feel great the next morning. 3-4 weeks, I think it took me to feel better. But I agree.
And can you imagine doing it if you were sick? Oh, I can't
That'd be horrible. I think I'm getting sick right now too, if you can tell from my voice. But
it's going around. A lot is going around right now. Mm-hmm. A lot of athletes, I think, at SBT even were, not just me. There were a lot of athletes, DNS and DNF. So unfortunately, I think it kind of maybe circled around the whole field.
I think, Jonathan, it's like the opposite way of like the pros, it's their job. Sometimes it makes more sense to rest because you have so many events and you don't want to dig yourself into a hole unless it's your A event, like Hannah said. But then for an amateur, you fly once per year or maybe once in 3 years to a place and you get lodging, your family comes and you have nothing else after that. You train for it. It's like, just finish it. Like, you don't care if you get a 9:30 or a 10:30. You just want to finish Leadville. And it's okay if you go 11 hours. Like, you just want to finish it. So, and then you're okay with being like, I'm going to really feel like horrible afterwards, but you feel horrible anyways, no matter what. Yeah.
So you feel horrible, but you did the race. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's tough. I think that the harder question is with training, right? Because the race has like this whole point. But when do you decide? And there are a lot of old maxims that you'll hear where it's like, if it's above the neck, you're fine. If it's below the neck, don't train. And I assume that what that maxim is getting at is if it's some sort of like bronchial infection or something like that, then you want to give yourself the time to improve. However, if I have always followed that advice, every time I get sick and it's something that turns into something really big, it always starts out above the shoulders, so to speak, like that. And if I train like aggressively and I'm going through, it just makes it worse. And it makes it so that sickness really gets a strong hold on me and it's tougher to let go of. So I don't think that maxim is something, I don't believe it's science-based. I think it's fair to say. And instead, I think that for me personally, and this is a lot of individuality applies here, I have learned over the years that when I see signs of illness, that it's better for me to just instantly back off on my training and give myself the ability to rest coming into it. If I push myself while I'm getting sick, I've found that it takes me a really long time to get better from it. Yeah,
when you say back off, do you mean rest, or just like do easy ride on the trainer or something like that?
The maximum that I'll do is an easy ride on the trainer. When an easy ride, like a great example of this, and also really good, Nate, like the trainer part is really key. That a lot of the time you'll be sick, you say, no, I'm just going to do the ride. You go out and it's freezing cold, dumping rain, something else like that. And you do a route where you can't just instantly go home when you feel bad. Instead, you get halfway out and you have a long way back and you have to suffer and make yourself, even worse. So the trainer and like volunteer or DANs, those are like two workouts that if you use TrainerRoad, you can search for those workouts and check them out, but they're low intensity, noodling along. It's like very easy workouts. And that's what I tend to cap myself at. And I have taken a lot of different approaches. For you listening to this, it may not be this way, but for me, I'll do that, or I will rest and I will eat, and I'll be happy to just say, nope, I'm just going to rest today. And I'm just going to do that instead. Take the energy that I would have put into my workout, and instead I'll put that energy into, okay, what can I do to make myself more relaxed? What can I do to make sure that I'm in maybe I'll go and bring in a humidifier, or I'll make sure that I'm taking a hot shower instead of doing my workout during that time. I'll prepare better food, like all the energy that I would have put into training. I make sure that I'm putting a good amount of that into resting, but then I'll also spend some of it on just making sure that I'm giving myself the help I need to get better. And that's what helps me with kids being young and in school. Like it's their first day of school for us right now. So I'm like preparing and just like battening down the hatches for the next like 3 weeks or so. Something's going to happen for sure. But I just have to take the foot off the gas. If I try to keep it down, it makes it so much worse. And then if you look back at it, it doesn't make sense. You've done like a bunch of training that is meant to be like pushing your limits and your abilities, but you've never been able to do it because you've been sick the whole time. So instead, it just makes sense to rest, give yourself the time so then you can get back to higher quality training quicker. And one thing that we do with TrainerRoad, by the way, is you can go on and add an annotation to your calendar. Just click on a day, and then you can put in illness, and you can make that go from any time to when you need it. And I typically, when I get sick, I put it on there, and then for a week, I make it extend out the week. And then if I need to, I'll click back on that thing after the week is over and I'll extend it if I need to again. But it's really cool because then adaptive training will understand that and be like, oh, we'll adjust your training for you. And like, we're not going to give you workouts on those days. We can push them out. And it really helps. The hard thing is we have to learn how to manage the voice in the back of our head. Hannah, is that hard? I mean, it's probably different for you being a pro athlete, but that voice in the back of your head that like everybody else is training, or everybody else is getting faster, or you should be training, you should be getting faster, but instead you're not. How do you manage that? No.
I'm like laughing as we're talking about this because I'm thinking of all the things I want to say. And I'm also thinking of my coach who will probably listen to this. And it's like, do as I say, not as I do. That's me speaking because my coach is going to be like, Hannah, this is not what you do. Because, it'll be like, oh, hey, coach, I'm sick, and I'll be like, oh, okay, let's back off. And I'm like, no, I can do it still. Just letting you know, just giving you the info. But that's the whole point, right? Like, I can still do it. You're not doing the workout because you can't do it. You're not doing the workout because you shouldn't do it. Most of the time we can push through to some extent when we're sick, but a couple things do happen, like Jonathan is saying, is one, a lot of the time when someone's sick, they'll keep training and they'll have kind of subpar workouts for several weeks, get sicker and sicker and sicker, and then take a week off. So instead of just taking that initial week off, now we have 2 bummer not hitting the workout super well plus a week off. So now we lost essentially 3 weeks instead of the 1. And also, you really don't lose fitness as fast as you think you do. I see this all the time. Someone will take 5 days off because they're sick, and then that 6th day back, their comment will be, "Can tell I lost a lot of fitness here." And it's like, no, you didn't. You just maybe feel like a little rusty, sort of, right? Like from a few days off. And I think that's a mental block that a lot of us, myself included, need to get over. Because if we just came back from the illness knowing, okay, I'm healthy now, I'm ready to go, I didn't lose a lot, I think it would be a lot easier to get over than if we come in with that voice in our head being like, I don't know, did I mess up my 6 months of training with 5 days off? I promise you didn't. So yeah, I think 99% of the time when it comes to training, it's so much better to err on the side of skipping the workout, getting healthy, especially for people with 9-to-5s, because a lot of the time the place that you fit in the workout is going to be with something that doesn't help you heal as well, right? Like if you wake up at 5 a.m. to do your training, that is also not super advantageous to healing. It would be much better to get an additional hour and a half sleep than it would be to get up and do that workout when you're already feeling less than yourself.
Oh yeah, sleep. Like I put in 10 hours of training a week. If you're sick, add in 10 extra hours of sleep. How sweet would that be? Your body would love it, right? Like the other side to this too, I've seen this, I'm thinking of a forum athlete now. Oh no. Everyone listening to this is like, do I have a tickle in my throat? But I'm thinking of this forum athlete that they were like, they were sick and they were hyper worried about coming back and losing fitness. And the first thing they did when they came back, their first workout back, is they went and did an FTP test. And they were just like, I gotta know. Yeah, I gotta know, right? Like, and they were like, see, I got super sick. And it's the easing back into things, I think, is important. There's a really cool tool that you can use with TrainerRoad when you do that. First of all, when you've said that you have an illness, it's going to push that out. Adaptive training understands the fact that you've missed workouts. It's going to ease you back into things. It isn't just going to say, well, if you had done all that training, you'd be here right now, so we'll just drop you right back in. It doesn't do that. It's smart. But then on top of that, you can look at those workouts, and if the workout seems intimidating, what you can do is you can use the alternates feature and click on achievable. And when you do that, then it's going to give you achievable versions of that workout instead of something that's going to be like productive or pushing your limits. And then it can make it so that way you can kind of ease back in and even psychologically allow yourself the space to be able to go through and have like a varied level of performance. Because like you said, Hannah, there's the physical side of things and the psychological. And when we're coming back from illness, those two are not aligned a lot of the time.
Exactly.
And it just takes a little while to get them there. So there's some intelligent wiggle room that you can do when you're coming back from it. And that's what I see from the best athletes too. They aren't looking for this ultimatum that's going to then decide the rest of their season. They're like, yep, I got sick. This is how much I lost. And that's the story for the rest of the season. No, instead they're just like, nope, I'm easing back into it and giving my body the time it needs. And then I'll be able to come back, So I think that's important. Nate, and there is no clear research on this. I think that this is hopefully understood by people, but is there anything that you take that you feel like helps with illness? Like, multivitamins, there's not a lot of research on multivitamins.
Well, yeah,
helping
when I get
that.
A sinus infection, antibiotics. There's some research on that.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's tough,
I do.
right?
Oh, no. You know what this has helped me. I've had a lot of sinus infections, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my mom said this all growing up, and I didn't know the reason why, but now I have that little gallon jug. Try to drink that gallon and my nose runs better. Like I can get more mucus out and it doesn't get stuck in there and have as likelihood, at least for me, to get a big infection. Like
You're saying drinking more water? Sorry.
Yeah, just being super hydrated so that my nose keeps running rather than clogging up. They always say hydrate when you're sick. And I was like, yeah, of course, hydrate. But I'm like overhydrating.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has helped too.
As I'm
sick
while
I'm saying this. But I didn't hydrate.
There are studies that have shown that people can recover from like illness and that sort of thing, like low aerobic exercise, like low intensity, low duration can be helpful. The hard thing is each person and each illness is going to be different, right? So it's really, you can't like A/B test that in a clean scenario. So that's a huge grain of salt to have handy with these sort of studies. But they've done like large scale studies where they prescribe this sort of thing, and then they look at it, and then with a big pile of data, they can see that it does seem to shorten recovery in some respects. Your mileage may vary. It's very independent. But I wonder how much of that, Nate, also is due to like exercise-induced rhinitis, like the fact that as you exercise, it does mobilize a lot of the mucus that we have in our sinuses and everything else. That's why our noses run when we exercise. That's pretty common. That paired with drinking a huge amount of water seems like a great approach, to be able to help with it. So yeah, I take multivitamins and I just hope that they actually they have an effect, but I don't know. Like it's probably like a lot of people say it just makes your pee expensive or something. That's probably what's happening, but I take it with hope and with faith that it is going to help protect me a little bit. Hannah, is there anything you do or anything that you find that's helpful?
Yeah. So if I am sick, I like the neti pot, the sinus rinse. And then if I am maybe going to be exposed but not sick yet, I like ginger. So actually at Trader Joe's, they have this powder that's 100% ginger. Just in like a powdered form. I really like that. So I'll drink it almost like a tea. Like I'll drink it warm in the evening.
Nice. Yeah. Shout out to Trader Joe's. They just opened one right by the office. It's big upgrade for us. It's fantastic.
I know. And then we're going to talk about sunscreen.
It's awesome.
Shout out Trader Joe's again. So
all right, sponsorship. Come on in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing with the nasal stuff, I've talked about this a long time ago, but I went to my ENT and they gave me what's called Wilson solution, which is a mix of, I think it has an antibiotic, it's the water, and I think iodine in it. But I added that to my neti pot liquid, and that just kills sinus infection so much faster. They have to compound it there at their office, which is, I don't know, kind of unique, I guess. And other people use a neti pot. Make sure you use filtered water. There's like, it scares me so much. It's usually in like the South in America where they get their water maybe from like a pond, and there's this amoeba that can be in the water. And if it gets in your brain, you get sick and you 100% die. There's no cure. There's no stopping it. Sometimes, and it comes from really warm like ponds or lakes. And sometimes like kids will swim and they'll get water up their nose. And it just scares me to death. Like, I've done it in Mexico.
It doesn't have to be
like,
distilled.
I use distilled water.
It can be distilled. It can be purified. You can, and
no amoebas.
One way, and sorry, a pro tip with this, I use whatever the squeeze bottle one is instead of the pot itself. And you don't want to apply a bunch of pressure when you do that, by the way. It can like blow out your eardrum and stuff. But with that one, because you never want to do it with cold water. Cold like feels super unpleasant and it's going to make your sinuses contract and it's not going to work. So I know that getting like purified water or distilled water to the right temperature that's like body temp or just slightly warmer is difficult. And what I do is I fill it up, and then after that, I just leave it like the hot water running over it, and then that heats it up really quickly. But so I'll just like turn on the faucet, and then that heats up the actual bottle itself. I'm not getting any of the water in there.
And you have to put those packets in. If you don't, it burns.
Yes.
Like I made that mistake a few times.
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully this gave everybody some good tips. We're heading into this sort of season when a lot of people are getting sick, and training is something that's tricky to manage amidst all of it. Dan has a question on sunscreen. Well, actually, no. Before we do that, Hannah, what's next for you? Are you going to be doing gravel national championships, or is it going to be going straight into Shawamigan or marathon mountain bike worlds? You've probably got a lot of things.
Yeah, so it'll be Shawamigan and then straight into marathon world championship, which is my other huge A race of the year. So prepping for that.
Sweet. Chance for rainbow stripes. That'd be sweet. And it's in the USA and it's snowshoe. So
yes. Yeah.
If you're going to go to that race, or if you're going to go to Shawamigan, go say hi to Hannah, cheer her on, and support her and all the people that support her. It's awesome stuff. Hannah, this next question, and Nate, curious to hear your thoughts on this. This is from Dan. He submitted this at TrainerRoad.com/podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, you can also submit your questions right there as a comment, and we can see them that way too. Dan says, does sweat-resistant sunscreen cause less cooling when riding a bike? Or more generically, does sunscreen cause less cooling, and does sweat-proof make it worse? I looked into this one, and Dan, there is no research specifically pointing to the two questions that you have and the orientation that you have them. That would be really cool. Researchers, if you're hearing this, that would be great. But most like sweat-resistant sunscreen, there's a lot of different varieties where they claim sweat resistance, so we can go into that. And there's probably going to be a lot of strong opinions on this too, Nate, with sunscreens, I think, in the comments. So let us know if we mess this up, and if you disagree with us. Let us know if you have found a sunscreen that does work.
Mess it up with sunscreen. Someone will say we are wrong, no matter what we say.
Yeah. So I guess, open us up. Come at us. We're good for it. I want to go over two of the main different types of sunscreens for people really quick. And then we're going to go into some studies that look into this, because the main concern here is it's twofold. Number one, if I put sunscreen on, is that going to make it so that I don't sweat? Because sweat helps cool me off. And then number two, if I use specific type of sunscreens, can those actually cause even more heat on my skin, which would then cause me to perhaps have not as effective evaporative cooling. And then all this could hurt performance, right? If you're not sweating enough. And then also if you're sweating too much, because that's also another situation that can happen with certain sunscreens, or if it's just too much heat, and that could affect you and make you slower. So then we're put between this rock and a hard place for us athletes, where we start justifying risk of skin cancer for performance because we're a little obsessed and ridiculous. So we'll go over it. But first things first, mineral sunscreens. So these are like the ones that you'll see a lot of the time where they're going to leave like a residue on your skin. They're typically thicker as well. They contain ingredients like zinc, or zinc oxide, I should say, or titanium dioxide. And then what they do is they're really not supposed to soak in. They just like sit on top of your skin, and it physically blocks UV rays from getting to your skin because it sits there as a shield on top of your skin, right? Then there's the other ones that are the chemical sunscreens. And what they do is these have typically, not always, but typically a much longer ingredients list. They're going to contain ingredients like oxybenzone, avobenzone, and then also octinoxate. And they absorb the UV rays, then convert them to heat. So then that way, that's then released from your skin instead of having UV rays get into your skin. That's how those ones work. Now, that would stop skin from getting damaged from the UV rays. But as we're all thinking right now, that could also cause heat buildup is the mechanistic thing that's going on here. That's the concern that we have. And before I go any further into the studies, Hannah, since your job requires you to be in the sun all the time, do you use these mineral sunscreens? I've felt like guilted before for not using them, into like doing like terrible things for me and the environment because I'm not using them, but this is a safe space. Which ones do you use?
Oh my goodness. Sunscreen is such a controversial topic. It's scary to talk about.
I know.
No, I've worked through a lot of different sunscreens because safe space, I really don't like sunscreen when I'm exercising. For me, it's uncomfortable. So I'm really curious to hear what information you have, because I don't know if it's just something I'm experiencing discomfort with, or if there's actually something physically happening. But anyways, I've worked through a lot of different sunscreens to see which I like best. And the two that I've found that I can tolerate are Trader Joe's brand sunscreen, which is an oil-free sunscreen, and then Supergoop, neither of which I'm sponsored by. It's just those are the two that I've found are tolerable for me.
But you could, Supergoop or Trader Joe's, if you're listening, you could sponsor Hannah.
Do you guys know the difference between SPF and the PA rating?
No, I don't. Can you delve in?
I'm going to blow people's minds here.
Okay.
I'm more on the like skin cancer, yes, but cosmetic, I don't want to look old. And there's a
okay, hold on. Yeah, got it. Yeah, understood.
Okay, so,
that's great. Yeah,
I pulled up some notes to make sure I got this right. But SPF, that is measuring the UVB rays. Those are what cause like sunburn and skin cancer. And SPF rating is how many more times it takes to get sunburn. So if SPF 30, it would take 30 times longer to get sunburn if you didn't have it. That's SPF. That's what we have in the US. Other places in the world have this additional rating called PA, protection grade, and that measures protection against UVA rays. And UVA rays are the ones that penetrate deeper into the skin and cause premature aging, wrinkles, age spots, like little brown spots in your skin, and it can also contribute to skin cancer. And that rating system measures like how long it takes to get like tan or darken. So it's a really weird system. It's PA plus, 2 pluses, plus, or plus, with like 4 pluses. And that's it. And it has to do like with there's actually a number associated with them. And I think PA plus is like, with the 4 pluses is like a 15 rating or something. And some sunscreens in Europe go up to like 50.
Sense. Super clear.
I know. Yeah. Go up to 50. But things like Supergoop, I think is a PA with 3 pluses. There's a big controversy because it's like Korea or Japan, they have other filters in their sunscreen that are not FDA approved here, but you can buy them. And it smooths way easier in your skin, provides great SPF and the PA protection with the 4. And it just sits better, so you're more likely to wear it where you don't have that white cast. I've done a whole bunch of different sunscreens from other countries, but the one I like now, it's expensive though, is Tatcha. It's not for working out, but Tatcha Silk Sunscreen. It just melts into my face, and it's like slightly tinted. And if you can see on the podcast, I'm wearing it right now. It's beautiful. Also, your computer screen can also give off, I believe, UVA. Somebody check me. Tell me if I'm right. Yeah. So you should want to wear
depend
sunscreen.
On if it's like a certain type of LED screen or something, or
I forget. Maybe it's not UVA, but there is some kind of okay, I'm wrong, but I know it gives some kind of thing off work. Just wear sunscreen all the time. And there's also the windows that come in. There's basically
I want a sound drop.
No
that was sorry, that was wonderful.
I think just get in the habit to use it all the time. And if you use something like the Tatcha, I think I'm saying it right, it's almost like makeup. It makes me look like I'm red skin. I look amazing when I put it on, and I love it, and I use it every day. And I'll use it even like before going out at night because it just makes my skin look good. And yes, I guess it is male makeup, but let's normalize that. It's fine. And so when you're doing it too, I like to get something with an SPF of like 50. I know like people say over 30 is fine, but 50. And then I get the PA. I look for the 4 pluses. And if they don't put it on the bottle, don't buy that brand. And don't sleep on the Korean sunscares. You can still buy them in the US, and they're still like legal. The sunscreen. There's even like push in Congress to try to get FDA to approve some more different kind of things you put in your skin to block it. And I think the last one we had were like in the 90s that was approved or something. I don't know. Yeah. That's my knowledge.
What do you wear if you're working out? Excuse me. What do you wear if you're working out outside though? Because you said that's not for exercise.
The one that I have used in the past is the Neutrogena Sport Face. It's like SPF 70. I've used that for Ironmans and everything, and it does not come off your skin like for days. And I mean, it doesn't look good. I just put it everywhere, and it gets in your eyes, it burns, but I've never gotten sunburn or anything like that. The other thing that you can do to cleanse it is double cleanse. Maybe some people are like, oh yeah, of course. But you guys ever heard of double cleansing?
No, I haven't. No, let's delve into the skincare routine. Yep.
But time to shine. I've reverse aged over the last few years, but okay, it is, you get this, it's like a skin oil that you get. So it's not actually just cleansing your face twice, but they're like $20, $10 on Amazon. And it's an oil that you rub in your face first, and it takes off makeup, but also sunscreen and dirt. And it also like the little like bumps on your nose, the little blackheads, it helps remove those. So you do it on a dry face, and then you rinse, then you put some water in your hands, you do that. And then you use a water-based cleanser afterwards to get it off, and your skin becomes amazing. And it's cheap and effective. And on TikTok, I'm on skincare TikTok. It is all the rage. And really, like you rub your nose, you get all those bumps. I will do this, and sometimes I'll do it for a few minutes on my nose, and you'll see the little like things that you would get off on a pore strip. They'll just come off automatically. And then I did it this morning, and then my nose is smooth. And
it's amazing.
I had a bumpy nose for like 38 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Is that? Can you link to this, Nate? Because I'm sure this is going to be interesting to people.
There's so different kinds. There's some of the heart leaf oil, and there's some Korean ones, but I use one that's really cheap on Amazon, and I love it.
Yeah, it says my friend Emily. Whenever she sees me, she's like, "Hello," gives me a hug. Then after that, she's like, "How's your skincare routine?" She checks. She's a dermatologist. That's like what she does. And she's awesome. She's always checking up on everybody and saving the world. It's pretty great. This is like a topic that, as a kid, of course, like every other kid, I was like, and I'm naturally pasty. I was just like, oh, I just want to be in the sun as much as possible to just get tan. Tan looks so cool, and that's what I want. Meanwhile, I saw my mom, like her whole life, she's suffered with skin cancer, and Yeah, it's just terrible. Having to go through the Mohs procedures and everything else that she's had to go through for so many years. It's really tough. They didn't know better in her day, right? Like no one knew. Like they were putting oil on to make sure they got burned, right? It was very different. So now we do know, and this is something that I do care about. And Nate mentioned the Neutrogena Sport Face SPF 70. I use that every day. Because basically every day I'm going outside, and I put that on whenever I'm going outside. I put that on my face. And then they also have a spray version that's not exactly the same, not the same ingredient list, but I'll commonly use that, or I use the Supergoop Play SPF 50. Like Hannah mentioned, those are the two that I found that I use, and it works well. With the Neutrogena one, when you rub it in, it doesn't stay white on your skin or anything else like that. It does absorb. It's going to give you a bit of a shine, but it's also not as oily, I've found. I don't know if you found that too, Nate, but it's not quite as oily as a lot of other sunscreens. Hannah, you mentioned the oil part, and that's like before a ride. If you put sunscreen on, then you go on your bike and it gets on your hoods or anything else, your hands are greasy. It's like a total pain. That won't get off. You're going to have slick bars, and that's super dangerous, like for your ride. So there's a lot to make sure that you're considering with that sort of stuff. But those are the ones that I use. Now, that's a separate thing from the fact of what we're talking about here with Dan's question about, does this make us slower in some way? And I looked into the research that exists on it. And I promise that skin cancer would make you very slow. Yes. And it's not worth it. So if anybody's listening to this, wondering if they're going to get some sort of like justification to just not use sunscreen, you're going to have to listen to a different podcast. We're going to encourage you to use sunscreen with this. But with that in mind, let's just look at the performance side of things and studies that look into that. This year in 2024, there was a study called Sunscreen Does Not Alter Sweating Responses or Critical Environment Limits. In other words, like, okay, this temperature is too high to be safe, the internal core temperature of people, in young adults. This was by Fisher and colleagues, and again, published this year. Here's how the study works. Subjects either had a mineral-based or chemical-based sunscreen applied to them. Remember when we talked about minerals, that it's just the topical thing that you put on top that acts like a barrier versus chemical-based. It sits on the skin, causes a reaction with the UV rays, turns it to heat. So they had one or the other applied to them. They then walked on a treadmill in a hot and dry, and then also in another situation in a warm and humid environment. This is roughly, it's kind of hard to say because it wasn't clearly detailed with heat index or anything else, but it seems like somewhere between 30 to 32 degrees Celsius or 85 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit roughly were the conditions. So very, warm. But the intensity was low to moderate. I don't know, but I have a hunch about that affecting this in a little bit, or in a certain way. The exercise was halted because they were measuring core temperature internally. The exercise was halted once they achieved what they deemed a critical environment limit. They measured the time it took to get to that limit. They measured core temperature, and they measured sweat rate. And here, in their own words, are the results. Evaporative heat loss, in other words, sweating, efficiency of sweat evaporation, skin wettedness, and sweating rates were unaffected by sunscreen. Sunscreen did not alter integrative thermoregulatory responses during exercise in the heat. And again, in this situation with this study, what they are doing is they are testing mineral versus chemical-based sunscreens. Granted, they're in a laboratory, so we did not look at if this is going to be affecting the heat interchange from UV rays to heat that would be caused by being out in the sun with that sort of thing. But at the very least, what this does show us is that according to this study, when you're exercising at a low to moderate intensity, it does not affect the sweat rate that you have. But now let's flip it completely on its head. In 2016, there is a study that seems from the outside in perhaps a bit more thorough in its structure, but I might be wrong. It's called Sunscreen Use and Sweat Production in Men and Women from Corona and Vargas in 2016, forgive me. They had 20 healthy college-age individuals, 10 male, 10 female. They rode stationary bikes for 20 minutes at roughly 80% of their max heart rate, so that's hard. And they did it in 30 degrees Celsius, or roughly 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and at 58% humidity, and they did it 2 different times. They applied a sweat patch to each one of their shoulder blades to collect sweat and to test 4 different conditions. Here were the conditions that were tested. They had an organic chemical sunscreen, and in this case, they noted that it was Banana Boat Sport Performance SPF 50. They had an inorganic physical sunblock, which is Nivea Solar Sun Protection SPF 50. Then they applied an antiperspirant, a roll-on deodorant, and then they just didn't apply anything, and that was the control. And then again, what they did is they had one shoulder blade would have one of these conditions, the other would have the other, and they did they did 2 separate tests to be able to test everybody with all 4 different conditions. Here are the results. Compared to the control of just nothing on there and just natural sweat, the antiperspirant produced 28% less sweat. The inorganic sunscreen, again, inorganic is the one that we were talking about with the Nivea Solar Sun Protection SPF 50. That caused 19% less sweat, and the organic one caused 6% less sweat. But we have to keep in mind, we are not testing mineral versus chemical here. These were both, in this situation, these were both chemical sunscreens that they had. They were both lotions that they applied, as far as I could understand from the ingredient list. They actually, in this study, you can go check it out and you can see the ingredient list, and it is alarmingly long and hard to pronounce on some of these for sure. And if that's something that triggers you, you might want a different study done to look at this. But the interesting thing is that this study does indeed state that there is a difference in what you get from the different sunscreen. They didn't test like viscosity, and I haven't tested both of those sunscreens, so I don't know what's different. And the authors even noted, we don't know what caused the difference in sweat rate with these. Nate, go ahead.
I think one thing's clear is that no deodorant on race day.
Yeah, there you go.
28% less sweat. I mean, you want to be sweating in your armpits, right? Like, it's a joke, but it's also serious. And I'm thinking, or you just do Old Spice without the antiperspirant, so you can still have the deodorant, but not I would not wear antiperspirant now on race day. And I know other people are going to say antiperspirant is the devil.
Yeah, I know, right?
But yeah.
Why not combine both things, sunscreen and antiperspirant, into one giant fire here? But I like. I'm super smell sensitive. I cannot stand when I'm riding in a group and somebody smells like BO. I can't. It just drives me nuts.
It's so hard.
It's so gross. And when you're stuck
behind
them and
advantage.
they're faster than you, and you have to draft off of them, and it's like, well, I should have been faster. So but you're just stuck behind them. It smells terrible.
Tactic. To smell horrible for everybody else around you. No one wants to draft you.
If you're like me, help me feel identified and let me know in the comments if you can't stand that. And if you know a friend that doesn't,
one person too, and it's like 2 bikes away. You know who they are.
It's so true. Oh yeah, it's so gross. Interestingly, and I don't understand this. So the author statement, they state that the inorganic physical sunblock hindered effective sweating to the same extent as antiperspirant. According to the data that I saw, it did not hinder it to the same extent. Then they say, whereas the treatment with the organic chemical sun filter was not different from the control treatment, which again, it was different. Not a huge amount. It was 6% different, right? And then the other ones, the delta was 19 to 28% different. So that is, that's not just a little amount, but perhaps there's enough variation in the data. Looking at the confidence interval and everything else, it's still, they ran those numbers and it almost kept pace, like the same margins. So I don't know what I'm missing there. Authors, if you're hearing this, let me know what I missed. Because looking at the numbers, it does seem indeed that we see some significant differences from condition to condition instead of them being grouped together. So yeah, this study does indeed show that sweat does change things. But then again, there's a study in 2017 called Sunscreen Formulations That Do Not Interfere with Sweat Cooling During Exercise. They had 24 female subjects. On half of their face, they put on a lotion that was SPF 70, and on one forearm, they put on a spray that was SPF 70, and on the other side of their body, like Two-Face from Batman, they didn't put anything on there. And they found no significant difference between sweat rate or temperature. If you look more into the research, you will find this back and forth where they see a difference and then they don't see a difference. They see a difference and they don't see a difference. We don't know what sort of sunscreen they used in the last study that I mentioned, by the way. They don't detail it. We have no clue. I think that what I'm understanding here is that not all sunscreen is created equal. And that there's some variance within that. Nate, go ahead.
I don't like that study because if your head gets hot, you're going to sweat not just on one side of your face.
Correct.
Your whole face is going to sweat your body's trying to cool itself. So I don't know. The sunscreen may make it where that one side gets cooler, but still the overall core temperature of your head isn't going to make it where only one side's going to sweat. You're sitting in the sun. You don't when the sun's on the left side. Not only your left side of your face sweats, your whole body sweats. Even stuff under your shirt where there's no sun.
Where I could see this method being effective is if you're using a mineral sunscreen, because a lot of the very logical complaint with mineral sunscreens is that it clogs pores, right? It's very thick. You put it on very heavy. It's the sort of thing that's going to sit very white on top of your skin, and it's not going to absorb. It's always going to look white. And a lot of people say, well, that clogs the pores and thusly you can't sweat. So that's the only thing that I would see where this could be effective. However, in this case, it was a lotion-based sunscreen, and I don't know any other details about it other than lotion versus spray. Spray was used on the arms, lotion was used on the face. But like you said, Nate, it's a bit of an odd way to do it. But then you keep looking at the research and it's just back and forth. One study finds nothing, another study finds a difference. The one thing that is consistent that I have seen is that there isn't any increase in body temperature, or skin temperature, that is significant or consistent with using the chemical sunscreens that convert UV rays into heat that is then lost through the skin. I haven't seen anything that's like any evidence that shows that there is indeed something that we should worry about as athletes, that putting chemical sunscreens on would then cause our skin temperature to rise in any meaningful way. So I think that's one concern that Dan had. The other concern was sweat. The sweat thing, man, it's all over the place. There's data to support both sides, but there's also sunscreen that's different being used in every different study. I personally have noticed that when I've used different sunscreens, that I do sweat more or less with different sunscreens. So I feel like you just kind of have to know that research looks into it. It's kind of a mixed bag, and you have to go back to experimentation and just finding one that works for you. This is something that, like, Keegan, for example, is just fully bought in on the mineral side of things, and he's running around Tucson, Arizona all the time, in Utah just completely white, like he's just covered in a thick paste of mineral sunscreen, and that's what he wants to use. I know that there are a lot of athletes that definitely go into that. And then I also know that I'm apparently killing myself and everybody around me by using just like spray-on sunscreens that might be chemical ones. I know there's a whole lot of controversy with everything that exists here. But again, for me, that Neutrogena SPF 70 face stuff is what I use on my face. Their spray I like there, and then the Super Goop Play SPF 50 on the body is what I use there.
Right. I figured it out. It's the blue light from the screens, and that it doesn't cause cancer, but it just causes like premature aging, hyperpigmentation.
Interesting.
Might disrupt your skin barrier. And then there are some sunscreens that block it. Look it up to see if your sunscreen does it. But yeah, that's what I was thinking of. So not a risk of cancer, but y'all got to look young forever.
That's right.
Nice. It's all this clear skin complexion. You get wrinkles, but just no hyperpigmentation, and you look great.
Sunscreen
Brad
companies
Pitt.
that are listening to this, why are you not sponsoring Hannah and other athletes? It's like, well, you make these sport sunscreens, or Nate, forgive me, yeah. But like,
that Tasha stuff is expensive.
Like the ad writes itself. It's like Hannah's out there training 30 hours a week when she's doing these big blocks or something. You know what I mean? Like she needs to have something that.
Air in the tires, water in the bottles, sunscreen on the face.
Sunscreen on the face. Exactly right, Nate. Yeah,
looking beautiful. Neutrogena.
See.
Love yourself.
Well done, Nathan. You should get paid for that one.
She takes care of herself, her body, and her skin. Everything matters. Right. Details matters. That's why Hannah picks Neutrogena Sport Face.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Checks in the mail. Nate and I are opening up an agency right now. So yeah. There you go. Hannah, is it a concern? Like you said, you don't like using sunscreen. So did you arrive at the sunscreens you use because you feel like they don't cause the sweating issues or anything else? You mentioned like discomfort. I don't know what you find uncomfortable about certain sunscreens.
Yeah. I feel like the way I describe it when I just use, I haven't gone into the detail to look at like what it is in each one that could be causing it. But a lot of the time when I use sunscreen, it feels to me like saran wrap. Like I feel like I just have saran wrap on my body when I'm riding. So like my skin isn't breathing. It doesn't feel like I'm sweating effectively. I feel hot. Sometimes I'll even feel like almost like pins and needles from it, just like feeling like I think it's the sweat not coming out. And so I've gone through a lot of different sunscreen, like personal testing to arrive at what I like. And it is a concern with how much time we spend in the sun. Like I recently went to a dermatologist just for like a skin check, just to make sure, and the dermatologist kind of looked at me like, you're really young to want a skin check. I was like, but I've probably had more sun than like a 60-year-old, like lifespan wise. Yeah. So I think, it is just generally speaking, for people who do our sport, especially endurance sport, and spend that long in the sun, it is important, really important to think about what you're using and make sure you're using it effectively.
I know I'm joking a lot about looking good. The cancer part is 100 million times more important. Like that's the number one. But if you're going to wear it anyways for cancer, you might as well do the other side too. There's this thing that's kind of scary, or maybe not everyone wants to do it, but you put your head in this machine and it takes pictures of your face and uses AI to figure out what your skin age is, like how old you actually look.
What?
Yeah. So it can be like, oh, if you're 30, it can be actually like you have the skin of a 44-year-old. Or sometimes people can do like lasers and retinol and stuff, and you can improve your skin so much that it, air quotes, reverse ages your skin so you look younger. Some dermatologist offices have that, and I've never done it. I want to do it, but it could be kind of jarring. If they're like, you're a 65-year-old, I'm 42. That would be, that would be a shock. But to Hannah's point though, the people listening to this, so much more sun than the average person. Hopefully you're training indoors a lot and you're okay. Less, but it's so important to wear sunscreen, everyone. I don't think I've ever met somebody who's older that goes, you know what? I just wish I would have worn less sunscreen when I was younger. Like a single person. It's always the opposite. Always the opposite.
Okay, here's the real telling question. If you do a long ride outside, like greater than 4 hours, it's a training ride, do you stop and reapply, or do you carry it with you, or do you just send it?
That's the thing. This gets into practicality, and I feel like practicality has to be considered and vanity has to be considered too. If you're a mineral-based sunscreen company and you make it so that I spread something on that makes me pasty white, I'm not going to use it, right? Like if I'm an average person, because I don't want to be viewed as pasty white. I want to be like viewed as tanned, bronzed, and beautiful. And then when you get into like the practicality thing of spraying something on versus spreading it in is like so much easier. And then you get into the reapplication thing and like how long something lasts. There's like all these barriers that stop us from using it. And I don't reapply, and I should reapply when I go out for a really long ride, because in most cases, like the Neutrogena one has the face sunscreen has way longer. One of the main reasons I use it, and I don't remember the exact duration, it's way longer effectiveness than a normal, like even like the spray-ons and all that stuff. I use a spray-on sunscreen that's supposed to last. I think it's the Supergoop one. I think it's supposed to last. It's hours. It's not in the time course of minutes, but it's hours. And I can't remember exactly what it is. You'll see a lot of sunscreens that are like just oils that you put on. It's going to last somewhere around, 90 minutes is typically what a lot of them say. So in an active scenario. So we should be reapplying them. That's why I think brands, like I see that Zelios brand at a bunch of events, like trying to market and activate. And I think that they sell these little guys that you can kind of carry in your jersey pocket or something else, and you can reapply partway through.
I have a friend who does that. He carries the little mini travel sunscreens while he rides, and we won't even stop. He'll reapply it while we're going. It's really impressive.
I would just have to clean off my hands. I guess that if you have gloves, it's okay, but I'd have to clean off my hands. Like a hand slipping off the bars is so dangerous. Like it's just, that'd be pretty sketchy. But yeah, we should be reapplying it, all of us, right?
It matters too how much you put on, about how long it lasts. And most people don't put on enough. For your face daily, like there's this thing called the 2-finger rule, where you take 2 fingers and you do the line on one finger, then do the line on the other finger, and you put it on. And that seems
like a
ton to people. Yeah. A tip is, what I'll do is I'll put on like one layer with like a finger, and then I'll like do some other bathroom stuff, and then I'll put on the second one. And then that works a lot better, and it feels, it rubs in easier, and it always gets in my mustache too, and I got to get it out of there. But try that so you get the proper amount. And I'm on Accutane too for acne. And so now if I go out in the sun, it's like every hour or so, or 2 hours I'm spraying. But when I was doing,
you burn really easy with that.
So easy. Yeah. Even with the Neutrogena stuff. So on the longer rides though, I don't think I would reapply. Maybe in a race, like an Ironman, I would, at like T1 and T2, I'd spray again, especially coming out of the water, but not on a ride. But you know what? I wouldn't really want to do those really, really long rides anyways.
Can we talk about that really quick?
3 and 4 hours. Yeah. I
see triathletes applying sunscreen before the swim, and they put their wetsuit on. And I just can't think of a situation, unless you're doing it hours before, but even then, like its effectiveness drops off. But unless you're doing it hours before, I don't see a situation where it's going to last. Like, it's not like there is movement between your wetsuit and your skin, no matter what. Like, even if it's a very perfect fitting wetsuit, it's still, there is movement that goes on. That's going to be rubbing it off. It's going to absorb into the material that you have on your wetsuit. You're in water that also breaks it down, most sunscreens. And I don't understand putting sunscreen on before you put your wetsuit on. And if you're a triathlete, can you explain that to me? Because in my mind, it's just, no, like once you get to T1, that's where you'd put it on. Once you get to T2, you'd put more on. But putting it on before just seems to make no sense. Maybe it's like a form of body glide.
Still work. Yeah, no, it seems still to work and stick on. And for shorter races, I've definitely not put it on again and been fine. But for longer races, like an Ironman, you're just out there for so long. So especially me. So you gotta put on a lot. Oh, the other thing too, which is cool, is on your iPhone, there's a UV index. You guys heard of the UV index?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It goes like 1 to 12, and that's how damaging the UV rays are. But you can put it on your lock screen so that when it comes up as a widget, and you can just see. So I'm going to my son's soccer game, and I'm like, oh, should I sit in the shade because my Accutane? But I'm like, oh, UV index is 1 because it's 5:36 at night, and I don't really have to worry about it. So just wear regular sunscreen, and I kind of sit right on the sideline so I can see him, rather than kind of hide in the shade so I don't burn.
That's a really good tip. Yeah, really good tip.
If we're riding too outside, that would be nice to kind of miss those times or if it's like at 12, get on the trainer. Sometimes in the world, and it's like you could burn in minutes. It's crazy.
Yeah. High elevation, like up here at Lake Tahoe, you get burned so fast. So,
last thing, I understand. Just because you didn't get burned doesn't mean you didn't get skin damage, and you can not be burned your entire life and still get skin cancer. Burning does not it's not just burning equals cancer. I don't want anyone to think that I'm just talking about preventing burning and preventing wrinkles.
Yeah. So now that we're all beautiful, we're sweating effectively, managing our heat effectively.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Good point, Nate. Now that we're there, let's move into this question, which was submitted. You said your name was Derailer Breaker, so I'll go with that. It said, hey, Rowan, I'm looking for some advice, please. Yeah, don't tell this person about UDH. They'll cease to exist. I'm looking for some advice, please. I don't really have a clear question, so I'm just going to mention some of the things I think are important, and if there's anything you guys can recommend, I'll appreciate it. They say, I have a coach, but I'd like to get as many opinions as possible, as that's the best way to learn. To start off, I'm a male in my mid-20s, and I weigh around 57 to 59 kilograms at a height of about 1.8 meters. So that's a tall person that doesn't weigh a whole lot. I think that's 6 foot. Maybe, Nate, you can run the math on that, 1.8 meters, but that's a tall person. I really struggle to see improve. 5'9". Okay, so not too tall then. 5'9", and then 57 to 59 kilograms is going to be somewhere around 130 pounds.
Yeah,
I really struggle this. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
John, because you're lightest, you're like 140, right? At
145 is like the lightest that I can get to and still perform decently well. I'm 5'11". Yeah. Okay. So a bit taller, and but I find that I perform best not just in the bike, but also just in life when I'm 150 pounds. If I go down to 145, I'm grumpy. Everyone doesn't like being around me, and I'm just good at going up hills, and then I suck at everything else in my life. So, yeah. Okay. This person goes on to say, I really struggle to see improvements in my power. I'm training consistently. And that's the first thing. I really struggle to see improvements in my power. We'll get back to that in a bit. They go on and say, I'm training consistently 14 to 16 hour weeks on the bike with enough recovery and easier weeks as needed. We'll just take you at your word there. I also focus on a ton on fueling, resting, sleeping 8 hours, etc. My FTP is around 270 watts, and I'm at 4.6 to 4.7 watts per kilogram. I'm racing mostly marathon mountain bike and gravel races. I'm not too bad on the climbs. Yeah, certainly. Not at 4.6 to 4.7, you're probably real speedy.
Yeah.
But as soon as the course flattens out, I get dropped almost immediately. I've tried to put on some weight, but had no luck. I may gain a kilogram over a month of eating so much to the point that I feel uncomfortable for most of the day, just to lose whatever weight I've gained in a couple of weeks. My goal is to be able to compete with the top guys in the races who are also local pros. I would think I need at least an FTP of 330 or more to be on that level. Even the guys in masters teams have FTPs of 340 to 420 watts, but are about 20 kilograms heavier than I am. I train 5 days a week with 2 to 3 days of intervals and just the rest zone 2. I hate the term zone 2 because this is a good example of it. They say, I'm also working on adding more low intensity volume, quote, strict zone 2 to my training.
I do so much zone 2, but then I'm going to do some strict zone 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in other words, when you say I do 2 to 3 days of intervals and just the rest zone 2, 2 to 3 days of intervals, and then what I'm reading is, and then just ride however I want. And then now you're trying to add in some, quote, strict zone 2, which is actually just zone 2 to my training. So is there anything that stands out to you guys that I could improve on to help get me faster? Thanks. First thing I thought of.
Do you know how old they are?
I don't know. And they don't, I don't have any information on their account or anything else and TrainerRoad sort of stuff that I would typically help with this.
7 watts per kilo is, you are at the top 1%. Like, that is insane. And then I did the math for what the FTP of like 330, they'd be at the heavier weight that they want, 59K, that'd be 5.6 watts per kilo. Like, that is competing nationally, right? Like,
oh, that's more than that.
That is a pro.
Like,
that's
that's a pro. That's what you're seeing in the Tour de France. You're seeing some riders be even below that, and not that many be above it. So that's like, it's very
Something's
rare.
going on.
Yeah. Well, this is
4.7. You should not be getting drops. At 270.
What do you think?
Right?
Nate? What comes
Hannah?
to your mind? Yeah.
I'm going to ask Hannah first.
Yeah.
What like, as a lighter rider with a higher FTP, and you are with men on the flats, do you get dropped? Like, or can you hang on to the
it can be a
draft?
challenge. Like, that's a place where, you know, if Matt Beers is on the flat and I'm on his wheel, like 100% I could get dropped.
Anyone will get dropped on Matt Beers' wheel. Like, one Cape Epic few times, like, what's his FTP, like 500 or something?
On the
Probably.
podcast, he said he very cleverly stated that it's set at 480, I think, is what he said. Which, in other words, read it's actually higher than that. That's what he was getting at. So other than Matt Beers, if someone had a 340 FTP, could you sit on their wheel? I'm sure. 340?
Yeah. I mean, especially you have to, I think, what I think about this, I think there's a few things that without more information we could dive into, but just at face value, I'm reading that you're probably not racing your strengths at an FTP of 270 and someone's riding at 330, 340. I mean, by the time you're drafting, sitting in on their wheel, using 30% less energy, like you should be able to sit in. So to me, I'm just reading that you're not racing your strengths. Maybe you've already decided, because this happens a couple times, once it goes flat, you're maybe a little less mentally robust. It starts to get hard. You expect it to be easy. Maybe you don't draft effectively. Maybe you don't sit in well. Maybe you're pushing too hard on the climbs and other people aren't pushing as hard as you are, and then you're too gassed for the flats. Maybe you're doing too much work on the flats and you're actually getting dropped after your rotation. Ooh. There's a lot of
you've
things
hit like
there.
17 amazing points.
Yeah. That's why I had to go first.
I just think you're probably not racing your strengths. Yeah. I mean, like Nate said, as a smaller rider and racing against men, I know that in the flat sections, I have to be intelligent about how I position myself and use my matches in order to stay in that group.
I want to talk about hard gainers later, like in that approach, and let's just assume that he's doing everything perfect. But this is awesome. This is the sort of stuff that's really actionable for all of us to talk about. And the one thing, before you go into this, Nate, somebody's listening to this right now and they might feel identified with this, or somebody's listening to this and they're thinking that it's absurd. There are certain athletes that can be extremely experienced. They have trained and raced for a really long time, but the level of, like, to achieve a level of efficiency and how to ride efficiently in a group is simply not intuitive to them. For others, it's naturally intuitive, or they have learned it. For others, it isn't. And so it's something they constantly need to work at. So if you're listening to this, I just want to make sure that context, we're contemplating everybody's different perspectives with this, and different people may struggle with it in different ways.
And I think it's important to start shifting your mindset a little bit, because and like Jonathan said, we can get into some different ideas because you do seem like you're on the smaller side, and maybe that is the goal that we need to focus on. But some of us, like if you are a certain size, there are some of us that are never going to get bigger. Like I'm 5'5". I probably will not. I don't want to be as heavy as someone who's 6'2", most likely, for my performance. And so it is likely that my FTP is never going to be 330 because of my size. And so instead of focusing on, I have to get to this magical number that I've listed for myself that realistically is probably out of my reach, you need to start shifting your mindset towards other ways that you can win and other ways that you can train that probably are more achievable than the goals that you're setting.
Mm-hmm. Hannah, do you share your FTP and weight and walk kg or not? Because I'm wondering, like, again, I'm looking for other examples. Like at Cape Epic, I was 365 through 70 FTP, and Sophia, very small, right, person on my wheel, stuck there like it was no problem, right? And I have a good draft, and she would tuck in, just nothing. And I know she wasn't at like 5.6 watts. I don't know. I don't think she was at 5.6 watts per kilo. I don't know if any women are at 5.6, right? Like, yeah.
I weigh 120 pounds, which I think is 55 kilograms. I'm 5'5", and my FTP is around 270 to 280.
Yeah. So like, in terms of raw power, this is going to be a similar scenario. And Hannah's racing with men in a lot of these cases with these mixed events that they do, which hopefully are becoming less frequent. Hopefully you get your own races for all races moving forward. But so this is a really like relative scenario or a relatable scenario for you. Nate, you ran some numbers on that?
Yeah. So that's 5 watts per kilo, and that's 54 kilograms. And so if this rider's at 2 or 4.7, I don't think it's let's go later on about gaining, but I don't think it's a power problem. Like Hannah being sick went sub 730 on a marathon course. And I don't see her getting dropped on the flat, especially marathon. You know what? Marathon on the flats, you go slower. Like you're not jamming it like a crit. Like it would be different if this is a crit was like surges and there's like yo-yos and stuff like that, like elastic band stretching. But that's not marathon. Like usually it's maybe sweet spot on the front, right? For marathon, people aren't really jamming it.
It should.
So I don't know.
Again, maybe he's jamming it, coming off, not rotating well, coming off the back, surging to get back up. And I just think that there has to be a lack of efficiency here. The other thing could be aerodynamics. If you're in a really not advantageous position, that could also be hindering you if the people that you're racing are being extremely aerodynamic. Yeah, I really don't think that this is a power issue, but maybe transitioning a little bit into things that they can do to put on weight is maybe it's possible that you are not at your goal weight and you are not as strong as you could be if you weighed a little bit more. Maybe it's later in the race and you're not as fueled, things like that. Jonathan, I'll let you talk about gainers, but the other thing I could see is he's talked all about his training, but the one thing I didn't hear is strength training. And that could help you put on muscle mass, and it could also help you gain weight through the muscle mass. And you said being hungry to the point of, or being full to the point of being uncomfortable. Potentially that strength training might also make you a little bit more hungry just by increasing that muscle mass, which greater muscle mass is going to burn more calories, and hopefully your body will desire those more calories as well with that.
Yeah.
It could be too that this person has a hot power meter and their power isn't actually as hot. We've seen that before.
Totally.
I've seen power meters read like 30 watts high. Another one could be in this marathon, you're not eating enough. And when you get to those later stages where it's flat, you're dropping off faster than everybody else. And it's just so hard. The other one is, it's kind of a joke, but true. I'm thinking of like other resistance, and maybe your derailleur is bent and your chain line's not right. But like I would be looking at,
totally,
because when you're on the flats, you're thinking rolling resistance. So some kind of tire issue. some kind of tire pressure issue, some kind of chain issue, or hopefully you're not wearing baggies. Because that,
totally.
what if they were? They're just like baggies the whole time. Just
visor.
Pop. Yeah, no visor. Like you can try aero helmets and stuff if it's safe for your race, depending on the coverage. I would be optimizing those things and tucking in.
That's a great point on the equipment side. Oh, sorry, Hannah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just also think, again, it just occurred to me because of the wording that they used. I focus a ton on fueling. Sometimes when people use that wording, it means their focus is focusing on being extremely health conscious. And then the follow-up is I eat to the point that I feel uncomfortable. I wonder if this person is fueling excessively through things like vegetables, which you will never be able to eat enough broccoli to gain significant weight when you're training this hard. So I wonder if you need a different mix of macronutrients in your diet as well.
I'm super glad that Hannah asked me to talk about hard gainers because it's clear that I'm the jack dude in the room here. So it totally makes sense. Just joking. We will not. Before we get into that, and I do want to talk about that, but this is a great example of this. The other night while doing a local road race, the juniors in our region are just so fast now. Like the development program has helped. They dominate every road race. They beat like guys that are all like really fast 20-year-olds or like middle-aged guys or ex-pros, and they just smoke all of them. So, and what they do on this road race course, and you can see Boca Road Race, you can see this course that I'm talking about on our YouTube channel. They climb so fast because they have these incredible power to weight ratios that they're like a boxer that just has this incredible hook. But when they swing the hook so hard that they just leave themselves wide open to get countered right after it every single time. And that's something where if you have a strength that is so pronounced and at 4.7 watts per kilogram versus local racers, chances are you have a pronounced advantage over most people going uphill. Because of that, I really like what you pointed out, Hannah. You need to play to your strengths, but you have to make sure that playing to your strength does not open up your weaknesses. Because all these kids that I race with, when they get into the flats at the end of the race, their comment is, I just don't know how you guys ride this fast in the flats. I don't know how you do it. And it's two parts. It's number one, they do have lower thresholds. But number two, so it's harder for them, right? But number two, the main thing is they're going so hard on the climbs, trying to exploit their strengths, that it just is so hard to recover from that, right? And then when you get into a rotation with them, what are the things that I'm having to say over and over? Anytime we get to a climb, let's roll easy on the climb, guys. A little bit easier, a little bit less whenever you're on a climb. And then when you're on the flats, then you keep it a bit more stable. If you hear this coming to you, if you hear that commonly when you're going up a climb and you hear from other riders that they say, hey, a little easier on the climb, a little easier on that, chances are you don't have this intuitive tied-in sense on how to carry speed best with a group. And carrying speed best with a group isn't just going as hard as you can everywhere. It's modulating the effort so you can use your momentum. And I think there's probably like a huge amount of positioning. Nate, like you're big, and on a bike, you tower over most people. So you've like kind of had to make sure that you're efficient in a group. Is there anything that helped you? Like, did you have a point of dissonance where you were, because you came from the triathlon side into road racing, did you have a point of dissonance where you're like, I thought I was following close enough or being efficient, but I realized that I'm not actually positioning myself well?
Yeah, the part that really got me, and I think Pete said it, is instead of like doing it by vision, I do it by feel. And it's not just right behind the wheel. I just keep moving my body and overwards until it feels easier, and that's the right spot. And that opened up a whole new world for me. And then being able to have room, especially in crits, for the accelerations and timing the accelerations ahead of time so that I can roll. Like sometimes I'd kind of be a little bit more off the back and I would roll forward before the group would accelerate because I know it's going to be an acceleration point. So I'm not doing as big of a power spike. Those things like really helped. I think too of like, there's a local rider, Miguel, who he's a small guy, and I want to say his FTP is like 250 or something like that. Not a lot. And that means he holds on so well, and he tucks in and gets aero. And like
he has to fight
really
for
puts it over
because his FTP is lower, but he just, instead of like putting the eggs into a different basket, he's just like all the eggs into the efficiency basket.
Mm-hmm. I wonder too if this rider then really because on a mountain bike, you can sit up pretty high, right? And you can then get really low. And I wonder if maybe there's some training or some adaptation to happen to really practice getting low. If you're behind someone like me, I mean, it should be so much easier riding that I don't see how I could ever drop you if at a 270 FTP, even if I'm going 400 watts.
Yeah.
Also, for mountain bike marathon, if you're a smaller rider focused on the climbs, you might be more tempted to have a smaller chain ring on the front, which can be advantageous in some cases. But if you're getting dropped because you're feeling like you're spun out.
120. Yeah. In the draft at 120 RPM.
Exactly. If that's the case, likely the other riders have a larger chainring and it's a pretty easy fix for you. But again, it's going to change the way you race a little bit.
I don't think a single person listening to this would be worse off by focusing on efficiency and spending some time focusing on it. It can help everybody, and every one of us can always be better at it. So I bet there's some room to improve there, but let's talk about the gaining side of things. And Nate, I'm going to defer to you on I've seen these hard gainer products that you can get, these mass app builders that you add on, and you can get them off Amazon. They come from and you can get them that are full on, that they're safe for sport certified and everything else. They're NSF
Like the weight
certified.
gainers?
Yeah. Like weight gainers.
Yeah.
Those are typically, from what I understand, Nate, it's very high carb and protein, but it's like a protein powder that has a huge amount of carbohydrate in it too. And that's, I think the principle behind this is, yeah, exactly, is that you're trying to get the sort of carbohydrates, probably a high carbohydrate to lower fiber ratio is the sort of thing that you'd be looking at in order to be able to gain without feeling so full, right?
No, see, those things are so tough because you eat those and you are full. Like the 1,000-calorie ones, it's hard to do that in a meal. Maybe before bed if you can sneak it in. But especially growing up, I had this issue of not being able to eat enough. And it is its own sport. And I think Hannah's thing about eating more calorie dense foods would be important. And the weight gainers, yeah, those could work. It's really tough training this much. I would say, if I was this person, really, especially you're training 14 hours, really focus on eating as much as you can on the bike, as much as before and as much after, because you don't have any weight issue. You want to get your FTP up. And if that isn't maxed out, you're leaving stuff on the table. You're leaving power, you're doing marathon stuff. If you're not trained and you're, I don't know how much, if you're doing 60 grams of carbs an hour, you have so much room to go faster. Hannah, how many carbs an hour do you do right now on a marathon?
My goal is I'm pushing up towards 120 now. That's my current goal. Yeah.
And Hannah's 5'6", right? So she's smaller than you. Yeah.
Small.
5'5", sorry.
Short.
Yeah.
And if you're,
that's what I'm saying is I think you can do it.
Yeah. If you're actually doing disciplined Z2, not this random
strict.
Z2. Yeah, strict is what the word. Yeah. Sorry, strict is the word. Yeah. If you're actually doing strict Z2, you should be burning somewhere between 540 to 620 or 612 kilojoules per hour. I'm just looking at what the numbers would be exactly.
Calories.
So in terms of carbohydrates, in order to offset that, you'd have to be riding it or taking in 135 to 153 grams of carbs per hour. I'm not suggesting you do that. I'm just bringing it up to the fact that even during a strict Z2 ride for this athlete, you would still be in a negative energy balance compared to at the start of the ride to the end of the ride if you were taking in 120 grams per hour in carbs. So granted, you're also burning fat. You probably have some other things going on to be able to make that up. But to nail Nate's and Hannah's point home, you have to eat a ton on the bike. And in your case, with your threshold at 270 watts, you still have to do it on zone 2 rides. Chances are, if you're doing the other stuff that isn't really well-disciplined zone 2, you're probably higher than that. And as a result, you're burning even more. And you might be sneaky, putting yourself in a hole. And then you feel like you have to make up for it. So then you're eating a lot off the bike and you can't really make up for it and you feel too full. And you get in this cycle where effectively you're just in this negative energy balance, even though it feels like it's positive because you feel like you're full.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you have to think about, I'm glad you ran that math, because let's say you do 120 grams an hour. So that's 480. let's just make it easy and say, so that means you're in 100-calorie deficit-ish an hour. You do a 4-hour ride, you finish at 400 calorie deficit. You can make that up in a meal. Like, that's great. But if you're doing 60 grams and now it's 800 calorie deficit at the end of that 4-hour ride, that's a lot harder to make
It's
up.
a whole meal.
So it really does make a difference what you eat on the bike when you start to calculate it out in that way, thinking about what you're going to have to eat in order to make up what you missed on that bike.
Plus the 4 hours of basal metabolic rate that you just wouldn't eat.
Yes.
Like you might, if you're doing 4 or 5 hour ride, like you'd normally have a lunch there, but you didn't. And then maybe you're not hungry after you ride and you end up eating 2 meals and you go, well, I did 5 gels during the ride. So that was enough. And it's not.
It's not.
I would look at that and then wheel bearings. You ever done that where you take a wheel and you spin it
Totally.
and one of your wheels goes and stops?
And stops, yeah.
Have you had that happen, Hannah?
Yeah.
That's when it's like a blessing because you're like, oh my gosh.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Thank goodness it's that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not slow. But it happens. And then sometimes though, in crank arms, you take your chain off and spin your crank arm. I've had it where it goes like 3 times around. Yeah. I was like, oh no. And other times it should go like it goes really freely. That can be easily misinstalled by a mechanic. Like I think we've all had that happen before where it gets too tight.
Oh yeah. Turns out this guy just has like extra thick brake pads the whole time. He didn't know. It's just rubbing on the rotors. The whole time. Yeah. Who knows? But yeah, it's the one thing I was going to say too with replacing the calories. You can get a lot of calories out of very fat dense food. I'm thinking like butter and like certain types of meat like bacon or something like that. Like a lot of fat. It's going to have a lot of calories. That sort of stuff fills you up fast. So like when you're thinking about what you should be replacing this on, following such a strict like regimen that you have of like, that's a lot of training volume. 14 to 16 hours per week is a lot of training volume. And if you're doing that all the time, if you're trying to replace the carbohydrates that you burned off the bike and you're just looking at it from a calories perspective, it's really easy to put that back in and get a lot of calories from peanut butter, from all the other sources of things that are really calorie dense, but coming from fat rather than coming from carbohydrate. Your body needs fat for sure. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but you need to replenish the carbohydrates that you're burning as well on that bike. So it's really sneaky sometimes. It's like, and don't measure your food if it causes like a complicated relationship with food. And this is just a learning that I've seen from a lot of people when they do measure food is the fact that they realize, wow, a lot of my calories are coming from sources of fat and less from carbohydrate. And as a result, if you're in that negative 800 calorie balance or deficit after that workout, getting in 800 grams of carbohydrates is really hard. That's a lot of carbohydrates to get back into your body. It's a very different matter if you're just eating, highly processed fatty foods. You can get back to 800 calories really easily, but that isn't going to be replenishing what you actually need to replenish.
Yeah. And I also, again, caught up in the eating to the point of feeling uncomfortable. It's hard to make up all of those calories in a meal. I would focus less on like your 3 meals a day, if that's something that you're doing, and focus more on, personally, I would be trying to consume a smaller quote unquote meal every like 2 to 3 hours. And that should be ideally a lot more comfortable way to get in those calories than just trying to sit down and eat as much as you can.
Yeah, that's what bodybuilders at least used to do. 6 meals in a day, they'd portion it out, they'd meal prep it, and you have like white rice and protein and maybe a little broccoli, some fish, sweet potato, and other white rice. Like you put some teriyaki sauce on it. They kind of eat very plain, but they just hit their meals over time. And it's, again, it's like its own discipline to be able to, if you are a hard gainer like this and you're training 14 hours per week, that's a lot of calories.
It's a lot. It'd be really tough to do. So I hope that was helpful, derailleur breaker. And hopefully maybe it is just your derailleur, like Nate said, the whole way through. Maybe that is the issue. But for all of us, efficiency, find ways that you can be more efficient when you're riding in a group. It goes a huge amount. You probably need to fuel more than you think. And if you do all that stuff, it can put you in a good place. Hannah, thanks for joining us. Glad we could cover these questions. Stoked for your upcoming races. Really exciting.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm excited.
Yeah. If you have questions for this podcast, submit them at trainerroad.com/podcast. If you wish to express your appreciation for Hannah coming on, go follow Hannah and support her supporters. If you want to express your appreciation for Trainer Road, go sign up for Trainer Road. Like we talked about in the last episode, we have a lot of exciting things that we are releasing now and very exciting things that we're working on. So stay tuned for all that, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.